At Oak Ridge Central School, it wasn't grades or talent that helped you survive. It was silence. You kept your head down, didn't ask questions, and stayed out of the way of those who mattered. Malik Turner learned that rule early on. Oak Ridge, Georgia, wasn't the kind of town that changed much. Paint peeled, smiles cracked, and everyone still remembered who was who. If you didn't belong, you kept quiet and hoped no one noticed. It had become a habit with Malik. He and his younger sister Zoe were among the few black students at Oak Ridge Central School. Their mom worked 2 jobs to support herself. Grandpa Raymond, a quiet man with a deep voice and tired eyes who didn't say much unless it mattered, helped raise them. "Keep your head down, kid," Mom always told them. "Don't give this town a reason to pay attention to you." And for the most part, Malik obeyed. He stayed out of sight, never crossed the line, never stayed out late, never gave anyone a reason to point fingers. Staying inconspicuous was a kind of security, until it wasn't anymore. Because at the top of Oak Ridge's social chain was Chase Whitmore, son of the chief of police. Quarterback. Golden boy. But behind the polished smile, there was something rotten. He didn't bully, he hunted. Chase liked to be in control. And he had a team to help keep it. Gavin, Rhett, and Tyler, not as sharp, but loyal and boisterous. They laughed when Chase humiliated someone. They supported him when it came to fighting. And they always disappeared when someone asked questions. Malik avoided them like everyone else, stepped aside and moved on. But Zoe was 12. Bright, stubborn, and too young to understand how Oak Ridge worked. She didn't know the rules. And that made her a target. It started small. A jolt in the hallway. An overturned lunch tray. A whisper behind her back. Malik had told her to ignore it. "They need a reaction," he said. "Don't give them one." But Chase didn't stop. He went for aggravation. One Wednesday afternoon, Malik was walking home alone, with headphones in his ears and a backpack over his shoulders, when he heard laughter, that sickening kind of laughter, harsh and cold. It was coming from behind the corner store. He realized something was wrong before he even turned the corner. Zoe was there, with her back against the wall. Her eyes were wide open, but looking defiant. Chase towered over her, holding her backpack in one hand like a toy. His guys stood around them, forming a loose circle, cruel amusement glowing on their faces. "Say it," Chase said, tilting his head. "Say you're sorry. Maybe I'll give it back." Zoe didn't flinch. "Go to hell." "Wrong answer." Chase pushed her. Not enough to knock her down, just enough to prove he could. Malik wasn't thinking. His body was moving. He crossed the alley in seconds, grabbing Chase's wrist before he could touch her again. Everything stopped. The laughter, the smirks all gone. Chase blinked, caught off guard. "Big brother come to play hero. Let her go." Malik's voice was quiet. Calm. Chase pulled his hand out, grinning. "Relax, man. Just messing with you." Zoe was breathing hard, but holding steady. Malik glanced at her, and that was enough. She didn't need to see him lose control of himself. He turned, about to leave. "It's over. We're leaving." But Chase wasn't done yet. He stepped closer and smirked. "What, are you scared? Are you going to hit me?" Malik didn't move, didn't blink. Chase let out a chuckle, a loud, hollow one. "I thought so." Malik didn't say anything. He just took Zoe's hand and walked away, his heart pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. And behind them, Chase called out one last time. "You're just like everyone else. Afraid to do something." But Chase had made a mistake that day. He thought Malik Turner was afraid. He had no idea what awaited him. Malik didn't say a word on the way home, and neither did Zoe, because sometimes silence is born not of calm, but of tension so intense that it clings to the skin like sweat. Malik kept his head down, fist clenched, jaw tightly clenched, but not because he was afraid, but because he was trying to contain something inside, something hot and burning that had no safe place to go, while Zoe continued to stare at him, her eyes wide and unsure, as if she wanted to say something but couldn't find a version of the truth that wouldn't derail her voice. When they got home, the door creaked open as it always did. The sound was sharp in the silence, and the house, dim and still, greeted them, as it always did, with a silence that seemed too loud. Their mother would not return from the diner for several more hours, and the emptiness within those 4 walls only added to the sense of reality of all that had happened. Raymond Turner, their grandfather, sat at the kitchen table with an old penknife in one hand and an apple in the other, peeling it in slow, deliberate spirals, as if he had all the time in the world, as if time itself had to wait for him to finish. And though he didn't look up right away, Malik realized that the old man had sensed something as soon as they entered the house, The kind of change in the air that you didn't have to see to understand. "You're late," Raymond said quietly, not accusing, just observing, as if opening the door for an explanation but not intending to walk through it himself. "Stayed after school," Malik muttered, voice flat, shoulders tense. Raymond finally looked up, eyes steady but unreadable, the kind that threw away all excuses and asked what you were really carrying. "Is something wrong?" Malik paused and shook his head, curt and unconvincing. "No." Raymond didn't insist, didn't scold, didn't even sigh. He just leaned back in his chair and said, "Okay," with the kind of calmness that said he already knew everything he needed to know. Zoe disappeared down the hall without a word, and when Malik finally stirred again, he said, "I'm going to the garage," though it sounded more like a retreat than a choice, and Raymond didn't bother to stop him. The garage had long since ceased to be a garage. It was more like an heirloom, part rec room, with old tools along the walls and crates stacked in the corners, smelling of dust and oil and that had seen better decades. And when Malik stepped inside and closed the door behind him, he just stood there with his eyes closed, his chest rising and falling as if something inside him was fighting to get out. He didn't scream, he didn't cry, he didn't punch the walls. He just paced, slow and tense, back and forth like a pendulum swung too tight, and the silence around him pressed down like a lid screwed on too tight. Because it wasn't just what Chase had done that hit him, it was how easy it was, how casual, how comfortable he looked, holding his little sister's backpack like a trophy, as if none of it had ever mattered, because in this town it didn't. Not to the people who decided what mattered and what didn't. And Malik let him walk away. He'd turned his back. Because he knew what would happen if he didn't. Because in Oak Ridge it didn't matter who started it. It mattered who the police chief's son said started it. And Malik could already hear the words they would have used if things had gone a little differently. Aggressive, violent, dangerous. He leaned his head against the cool concrete wall, fists shaking at his sides, trying to swallow the shame and rage, trying not to think about what it meant that he hadn't protected Zoe the way he wanted to, that he'd done the smart thing, the safe thing. The thing that had Chase laughing and Zoe shocked. And at that moment, the door opened again. Raymond walked in without a sound, closed the door behind him, and leaned against the frame, crossing his arms. "Are you pacing the hole in my floor?" he asked, not smiling, not teasing, just letting the silence stretch on until Malik decided whether or not to face him. Malik didn't turn around. "Do you want me to talk?" he asked, his voice low and strained. Raymond shrugged. "I want you to stop trying to carry the whole world in your chest." He pushed her, he said, like she was nothing. And I was just standing there. I didn't even. He fell silent, the words stuck in his throat. "Do you blame yourself?" Raymond said, pitching forward a little, "because you didn't fight him?" "I blame myself for letting him get away, thinking he'd won," Malik replied, barely louder than a whisper. Raymond didn't flinch, didn't interrupt. He simply walked over to a shelf, pulled out an old metal toolbox and slowly opened it. Inside, beneath the rusty tools and tangled cords, lay a photograph, faded, black and white, with bent corners. In it stood a young Raymond, dressed in uniform, with sharp and tired eyes. "When they first raised a hand on me," he said, his voice like gravel and old truths, "I didn't fight back either. Not because I couldn't. I knew I'd have to pay for it." Malik furrowed his brow, his breathing becoming shallow. "You think you were weak for walking away," Raymond said, meeting his gaze, "but you were smart. And being smart isn't always pleasant. Especially when your blood is boiling and the whole world seems crooked." "I hate him," he admitted, enunciating the words with sincerity and honesty. "I hate him for being able to walk around like nothing happened." Raymond nodded. "Good," he said. "You hang on to it. But don't let it eat you alive. Let it shape you. Let it teach you. Let it prepare you." Malik lifted his head, eyes narrowed. "For what?" Raymond stepped back and put a hand on his shoulder, firm and confident. "For when you don't just answer, you change everything." 2 days passed, and with each passing day Malik told himself that perhaps Chase would leave it at that, that after the confrontation in that alley, after the interrupted conversation, the situation would evaporate of itself. It was Friday afternoon. Malik had just finished basketball practice, his t-shirt stuck to his back from sweat. His muscles ached in that good, hard way that makes your legs hurt and your thoughts slow down enough to pretend the world outside the court didn't exist. But that illusion was shattered the moment he heard Zoe's voice, not quite a scream, but harsh, angry, and tense with fear. He dropped the gym bag before his mind could even pick up his body and ran towards the back of the building. His heart was beating very fast, As he turned the corner, everything inside him went cold. Zoe was lying on the ground, her backpack open, books and papers scattered like trash, and Chase was standing over her with the same twisted grin on his face, hands on hase hips as if posing for a photo, and Gavin and Rhett were standing nearby laughing, but quieter than usual, like even they weren't sure it was just a joke anymore. Malik walked over to Zoe first, helped her up, keeping his eyes on Chase's face, and he could feel her hands shaking, see her jaw tense, her jaw trying not to cry, trying to be brave, trying to be like him. Then Chase shoved him. Not playfully, not carefree, hard, deliberately. Enough to say, "This is your line, cross it, and I'll bury you." Malik took a step back, caught himself, straightened, and stared at Chase with a stillness that made the whole world go quiet. Because this wasn't the scared kid who'd left 2 days ago. Chase stepped closer and smirked. "Come on, Turner. Do something. Show me you're not just a coward in pretty shoes." Malik remained silent, didn't flinch, and then Chase took a swing. It wasn't a good swing, not from someone who never got a return punch. Careless, wild, it had more rage than form, more ego than threat, and Malik dodged it as if he'd seen it in a dream. Chase's hand parted the air, and his balance staggered, just enough for Malik to step forward and deliver a short, precise blow to his stomach. Not enough to cripple, but enough to make his offender aware. Chase gasped and jerked back, his face contorted in surprise, but not because it hurt, but because it had happened the first time in his life someone had touched him without fear. Rhett and Gavin were silent. Chase's face reddened, but not from pain, but from something worse, humiliation. He lunged at him again, this time with more anger and less composure, swinging his fists as if he could erase what had just happened. But Malik wasn't who he thought he was. He dodged to the side again, stepped and caught him with an elbow just below the shoulder, knocking Chase off balance, out of rhythm, and then, with both hands, Malik shoved him back. Chase stumbled, tripped over his own feet, and for a second it looked like he might fall flat on the concrete. But he caught himself, barely breathing, chest heaving heavily, hands clenched into fists but not moving. He wasn't used to this. He wasn't used to not being able to win. And Malik just stood still, calm, breathing evenly, with eyes like a mirror that reflected everything Chase didn't want to see. For the first time, Chase hesitated. And then he turned. Didn't say a word. Didn't threaten. He just turned and walked away. His guys followed slowly, looking back, not knowing whether to laugh or run. Malik stood still, adrenaline humming in his veins, until he felt Zoe step beside him, her hand still clutching the strap of his backpack like a lifeline. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low voice. She nodded, her breathing uneven but steady. "And you?" He looked in the direction Chase had gone and felt something different for the first time in days. He wasn't sure if it was relief or the beginning of something worse, but one thing he knew for sure. This wasn't over. When Malik had come to school, other students had been full of curiosity, others had flashed something close to respect, but most were just wide-eyed and unsure, as if they didn't know what to make of the kid who didn't play by the rules, who stood up when he should have been quiet, who had raised his hand to Chase Whitmore. At one point, a voice over the intercom echoed throughout the classrooms. "Malik Turner, report to the principal's office immediately." No one said a word as he gathered his things and stood up. No teacher stopped him to ask what was wrong. No classmate dared to look him in the eye. He walked alone, the hallway stretching ahead like a courtroom passageway, and when he reached the double doors of the main office, he didn't need to open them to realize he was already in court. Director Warren sat at his desk, fingers interlocked as if rehearsing something serious, but he wasn't alone. Chief Gregory Whitmore stood in the corner, arms crossed, and though the badge on his chest glistened as if he were proud of himself, his eyes burned with the cold fire of a man who believed that his son could do no wrong and that any black boy who thought otherwise must be corrected. Malik stepped inside, closed the door behind him, and stood up straight. Principal Warren cleared his throat, already feeling awkward, already shrinking into the shadow of the man beside him. "Malik," he began in a thin voice, "do you know why you're here?" Malik glanced at Chief Whitmore, then at Warren. "No." The chief chuckled, a low, slow, the kind of laugh that wasn't meant to be funny, but was meant to remind him who the master in the room was. "Don't play dumb, son," he said, and the word son sounded like an insult. "You know exactly why you're here. You've put my boy in the dirt." Malik stayed silent at first, Because sometimes silence is the loudest thing you can offer. Your boy, he said finally, raised his hands on my sister. Principal Warren staggered in his chair, as if the air had become too heavy for him to breathe. Let's keep calm, he muttered, trying to keep his cool and already failing miserably. But the chief didn't blink an eye. He leaned forward, staring at him intently. I don't care what you think about what happened. My son came home with a busted lip and a bruised rib and told me that some bully jumped him behind the school. The word bully sounded like a whiplash, and Malik felt his fist clench at his sides, but not from fear, but from the deep, cold knowledge that nothing he said in this room would matter to the man across from him, not because it wasn't true, but because it was coming from him. So now what? He asked in an even voice. Are you going to press charges? The chief smiled, slowly and smugly, the way one smiles before slamming a door. I had a little talk with Director Warren, he said, and we agreed. This kind of violence cannot go unanswered. Malik turned to Warren, who still wouldn't look him in the eye. We're suspending you, Malik, Warren said, the words flying out of his mouth like he was trying not to choke on them. Indefinitely. Malik stared at him. For protecting my sister? The chief snorted derisively. For assaulting my son. You're lucky we're not dragging you down to the station right now. The walls of the office seemed to close in. The silence was louder than any scream, and Malik stood in it, calm, motionless, knowing deep down that this was real. Malik swallowed the rage like broken glass and forced his voice not to shake. What about Chase? What's going to happen to him? Principal Warren shifted again and looked at the papers on his desk as if they could save him. We are handling this matter internally at the school. Malik laughed, harsh and humorless. Right. Of course. The chief stepped forward, his voice a little lower, a little harsher. You think this is a game, son? You think you can hit my boy and walk away like a hero? Let me tell you something this town remembers. You step out of line again, and I'll make sure you get kicked out of more than just school. Are you done? He asked. Warren's voice cracked when he said it. Go home, Malik. We'll let you know when, or if, you'll be allowed to return. Malik turned without another word and walked out of the office, fire blazing in his chest. As Malik walked home from school, he wasn't thinking about strategy or reputation, or even revenge. He was thinking about Zoe, about the look on her face when she realized he was being punished for protecting her, about the message not just to her, but to every child who had ever kept their head up to survive. He expected the house to be quiet when he arrived. His mom didn't usually get off shift until after 8, and Raymond didn't ask questions unless you addressed him first, but when he crossed the threshold, the silence was broken by the sound of keys hitting the counter and the sharp snap of a purse zipper. His mom had come home early. She turned when she saw him and flashed her eyes. Did you get suspended from school? She asked in a steady, cold voice that cut through the room like a knife. Malik froze, barely being in the doorway. How did you? I found out at the gas station, she snapped. From Ms. Avery, not you. That's how I found out my son got kicked out of school for fighting with the police chief's boy. He opened his mouth, closed it, and finally squeezed the words out. I didn't start it. Chase raised his hands twice at Zoe. I intervened. That's all I did. His mother shook her head, turned away as if she couldn't bear to look at him, and for a moment the resentment in her voice sounded like betrayal. I work 2 jobs, Malik. I kill myself so you can have food on the table and a roof over your head, and now they're talking about pressing charges. There are no charges, he said quickly, but even as he spoke he realized the line was thin, that it could break at any moment. Not yet. She leaned against the counter, covered her face with her hands, and took a breath that didn't quite calm her. You think they'll protect you? You think standing up to them makes you strong? No. It makes you a target. And if something happens... Her voice cracked. If something happens to you, Malik, this town won't cry for you. They'll pretend they never knew you. He didn't yell. He didn't argue. He just stood there, swallowing 100 words he wanted to say, 1,000 ways to explain that silence didn't save anyone either. But before he could answer, Raymond appeared in the hallway, quiet as ever, voice low. Let the boy breathe, Denise. Let him talk. She looked at him, then at Malik, then swept past them both into her bedroom, closing the door behind her not with a clatter, but with something worse. Malik stood for another second, then turned to Raymond, who pointed to the back door. Come on. You need some air. They sat down on the steps of the old porch, the wood of which had grown soft from years of stories and secrets, and for a long time neither of them said anything. The sun was setting, casting long shadows on the quiet street, and somewhere in the distance a dog barked, as if it were the only living thing that didn't care what happened today. At last Raymond spoke. "You know I wasn't always this quiet," he said in a slow voice, as if each word had weight. "I was like you once, full of fire, ready to stand to my full height when others ducked their heads. I had a friend. His name was Deshaun. We grew up together, shared everything. One night we got pulled over driving after a high school game. Cops said the car looked suspicious. Said we were causing trouble. I kept my mouth shut. Deshaun didn't. He ended up with a broken arm and a criminal record. I ended up with an embarrassment that hasn't left me since." Malik turned to him, surprised. "You never told me about that." Raymond nodded slowly. "Because for a long time I convinced myself that I had done the sensible thing. Safe. But sometimes silence costs more than bruises." Malik looked at his hands. "So now what?" "They kicked me out. Chase is on the loose. Everyone's scared." Raymond tilted his head. "Scared? Or are they waiting?" That night, Malik made a list. Names he remembered. Kids who flinched when Chase walked by, who changed hallways, who used to laugh louder but now lowered their eyes. One name flashed before him like a spark: Andre Booker. Andre had transferred to another school a year ago. Rumor had it that Chase and two of his boys had cornered him behind the gym. Broken nose. Broken cell phone. He disappeared a week later, and no one ever mentioned it again. Malik still had his number. When Andre picked up the phone, his voice was tentative. "Malik Turner? From Oak Ridge. I need your help," Malik said. "With Chase Whitmore," he added. The silence dragged on, and then Andre exhaled heavily. "I'm ready to help you." Andre handed Malik a video clip to prove who the real aggressor at the school was. Only there was nothing flashy about the video clip. The video clip was Andre Booker sitting on the edge of the basketball court at his new school, legs swinging, face serious. Eyes fixed on the camera, as if he were talking not to the lens, but to every kid who had ever swallowed his fear until it soured in his gut. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't cry. He just told the truth. About the day Chase Whitmore had cornered him. About how he begged the school to intervene. About how nothing happened. About how he was made to feel like a problem for not laughing about it. About how silence was supposed to be survival, but it didn't really save anyone. And then, at the end, he looked into the lens and said, "I'm not afraid of him anymore. And neither should you." Other students started telling stories, too, and one student was Maya, who was pushed down the stairs by Chase in 9th grade and pretended she just fell because she didn't want to make it worse. There was Carlos, who got reprimanded for talking out of turn after Chase knocked his textbooks out of his hands. There was Hannah, who filmed one of the attacks on camera but deleted it after the principal warned her about spreading rumors. And then there were the teachers. The gym coach who said he saw bruises. A math teacher who said she was told to stop escalating disciplinary reports. A cleaning lady who said, "I see more than they realize." They all remained anonymous at first. Each was still afraid to be the first. But Malik didn't insist. He just kept gathering information. Quietly, carefully, patiently, until he had gathered enough that the truth was no longer just a story. And when Principal Warren announced that the school board would hold a student behavior review in the gym that Friday, led by Chief Whitmore himself, Malik didn't flinch. He knew what it would be. An introduction. A warning. A last-ditch attempt to make an example of him. But Malik was tired of playing by their script. When he walked into the gym that afternoon, he wasn't alone. Zoe was standing next to him, head held high. Raymond stood in the back row, arms folded, eyes sharp. There were others: Andre, back in town for the day. Maya, Carlos. The parents, teachers, reporters with notebooks, students with phones already recording. The school board sat at a folding table, prim and pale, and in the center of it all sat Chase Whitmore and his father, one stone-faced, the other smug, as if it were another bump in the road he'd already paid someone to pave. Principal Warren cleared his throat as if he was afraid of his own voice. "We are gathered here today to address an escalating problem involving student violence and misconduct, specifically the actions of Malik Turner." And then the chief leaned forward and began to speak. "We've seen the videotapes on the internets, but it's time to put an end to this circus and remind the school who's in charge." Malik stood up and began to respond. "You want to talk about violence?" he asked, loud enough for all the rows to hear. "Let's talk about all the times Chase attacked someone and nothing happened. Let's talk about the reports that disappeared, about the videotapes that were deleted, about the bruises that no one wanted to see." He pulled out his phone and tapped the screen. The projector lit up. Andre's video played. Then Maya's. Then one after another. Voices. Faces. Evidence. Names. One thing after another. There was silence in the room. And when the materials ended, Chase jumped to his feet. "This is a setup," he bellowed, reddening his face. "They're lying." But the crowd didn't move. No one laughed. No one nodded. Because no one believed him anymore. Chief Whitmore stood up, ready to shout something, but not before the voice of Mrs. Holloway, the history teacher, came from the teacher's row. "I believe them." Then Coach Sanders. "Me too." Then another. The students, teachers, parents. And Chase, for the first time in his life, looked around and saw a crowd that wasn't with him. A world that no longer bowed. Principal Warren looked apprehensively at the chief and the crowd, then spoke quietly into the microphone. Immediate suspension of Chase Whitmore indefinitely pending a full investigation. The chief slammed his hand on the table, but no one moved from their seat to stop the decision. And when he turned to Chase, even his son looked like he didn't know what to say. Because when you've built your power on fear, the day people stop being afraid is the day everything comes crashing down.